sounds, our ramble through the films of Dario Argento continues with his second film, Cat O' Nine Tails. Now, Dario himself has stated on a number of occasions that this is the least favourite of all of his films, but after seeing it, one can only presume that he made those statements well before making the likes of Dracula 3D. The first thing I have to point out that will invariably have coloured my opinion of this film, that this DVD version of it is abominable. The picture is bad, probably cropped, almost certainly pan and scanned. The soundtrack is atrocious. I could barely hear the dialogue, and there's no option of English subs to smooth over those cracks. So I'm very conscious of the fact that I haven't seen Cat O' Nine Tails as Argento himself would have presented it. The film starts with a break-in at a pharmaceutical company who is researching gene therapy, and whilst nothing has been taken, industrial espionage is suspected. It falls to a blind crossword puzzle settler and a young newspaper reporter to team up and investigate. And in true Argento fashion, as employees of the company, suspects themselves start turning up dead, these two themselves become a target for the killer. What unfolds is, for the most part, a fairly standard thriller, albeit one punctuated by some remarkably shocking moments of expertly staged violence. Towards the start of the movie, someone's pushed in front of a train, so lovingly detailed, but over in a flash. You will find yourself rewinding instantly, and what did I just see? And at the very end of the movie, a character falling down a lift shaft. Even though I've not seen the film, I'd seen that clip in montages of documentaries about Argento, with the character trying to grip the cables on his way down and smoke coming off his hands. It's fair to say, though, that the killings, these moments of violence, these two instances aside, are more standard thriller fare than the more expansive Argento that we think of when we think of Argento violence. I'm convinced with this, after The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, that he was attempting to just make a solid murder mystery thriller. To that end, coming to it as I have done so late in the day, after having seen Tenebrae, Phenomenon, Suspiria countless times, it's again, as with Bird with the Crystal Plumage, potentially very easy to be underwhelmed by the movie. This is certainly Argento containing himself. This is Argento on his second movie, feeling his way through this genre that he clearly loves. That said, the film is extremely stylish. What else would you expect from the maestro? There are lots of really uncomfortable extreme close-ups that he loves doing. There's a prowling camera POV of the killer that keeps you nicely unbalanced and nicely on edge. It's an effect that by the time a decade later is used in a multitude of American slasher movies has kind of become passé by then. But this is a film that's obsessed with sight and lack of sight, or seeing part of a whole. Sight, observing, and the act of observation being flawed is something that Argento is fascinated with throughout his career, and it's something that he uses the camera to force upon us. Even more effective in this film is a technique I don't remember having seen him employ since, and I wish he would, a kind of rapid cutting back and forth between transitional scenes. So rather than cutting from one scene to the next scene, you'll be on the end of scene one, and then you get a flash of the next scene, and then back, and then backwards and forwards until you're eventually in the next scene. It's so disconcerting. It completely takes your centre away. You worry for a moment where you are. The first insert seems to be something occurring to the character, because then we're back with him. You're so unsettled in time and space for a while. He does that 2 or 3 times maybe throughout this movie. It's amazingly effective, and it's amazing to me that he can have an editing transitional technique like this that's so effective, and then just, we'll never really use it again. I've done that. That one's done. Let's move on to the next thing. What really helps solidify the movie, if it's not going to be extravagant in other areas that we've come to expect from Argento, it's got a really solid centre. The 2 leads, James Franciscus and Carl Malden, who play the journalist and the blind ex-journalist respectively, are incredibly solid in their roles. They also managed to craft a likeable, understandable relationship between the 2 of them. Believable performances in Argento movies are as rare as hen's teeth, let alone believable relationships between 2 believable characters. I'd say Argento's still trying to find his feet here, stepping away from the template that he laid out in Crystal Plumage, that he would return to and tweak later on down the line to practical perfection. The murders here are a factor of the plot rather than existing as punctuation. There's perhaps an attempt to return to the pulpy thriller origins of this film movement, the Giallo murder mystery pulp novels. The investigation is of prime importance here, a mystery to be solved and a lineup of suspects that gets ever shorter. Ultimately, there are too many threads to this investigation. That is indeed what the title refers to, the cat o' nine tails. There's no cat, there's no whip, there are just 9 leads for these amateur detectives to follow that might lead to the answer. A leaner plot may have paid dividends, but cat o' nine tails, plot-wise, if he wants to focus purely on a murder mystery rather than more extravagances, the plot sometimes collapses under its own weight. The leaner, meaner giallos of Argento would make him an international superstar and forever make his name synonymous with a certain kind of colourful, brash, brazen horror filmmaking. Cat o' nine tails is not that. It's just a decent murder mystery. Now, for my review of The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, we touched briefly on Argento and his relationship towards women and violence against women in his movies. It's a theme I suspect we will continue to return to as we explore chronologically his filmography. And this is probably a good point to bring up another theme that we will probably continue to touch on in this movie and later movies: Dario Argento and representations of homosexuality. I think I'm remembering rightly that in Crystal Plumage there was a sort of side character, a stereotypically camp antique shop owner who made allusions to one of the victims, an ex-employee of his, possibly being a lesbian. As well in that film as a lineup of perverts that mistakenly includes a transvestite. I'm not clear what was meant by the police by perverts, whether that was people with a record of violent crime, sexual crime, or whether they were just rounding up the known gay men of the time. Was Dario perpetuating stereotypes or highlighting the erroneous confluence in the minds of the police at the time between sexual orientation and criminality? The usual suspects, in huge inverted commas, in The Bird with the Crystal Plumage for sexualized violence and criminality are the minorities, the people on the outskirts of society, the outliers, that Dario is fascinated with, I suspect is empathetic towards, but sometimes his portrayal of them can be a little heavy-handed. I think in The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, he actually highlights the wrong-headedness of such entrenched thinking of equating sexual orientation and criminality. Now, in Cat o' Nine Tails, there's quite a daring for 1971 sequence set inside a gay bar that reveals that one of the main suspects is gay. Our newspaper reporter doesn't give two stuffs about who this guy is attracted to. He's not interested in doing a salacious gossip piece or outing him. He's just one of the suspects and needs information for his investigation. It's telling, though, in the movie that when the available evidence makes it look as though this character, Braun, may be the killer, the police seem satisfied because of his orientation, because he's gay. They're quite satisfied now that they've got their man. Again, Argento seems to be highlighting that hypocrisy of thinking and saying, no, the psychology of these killers is completely different. Completely different. Homosexuality is not criminality. Braun certainly doesn't seem to be like an offensive construct of gay stereotypes in this. His sexuality is simply a matter of fact, amongst many other facts to be sifted through for their importance or lack of importance to solving the mystery at hand. It's to Argento's credit, I think, that in the end, Braun's homosexuality is of no consequence to this mystery at all. I was amazed to see such a, for the time, progressive representation of a gay man. I like the fact that in this film, the MacGuffin, the genetics of it, whilst completely and utterly hokey, turns out to be to do with a study into the human genome that has identified a link between a specific chromosomal sequence and violent criminal tendencies. I think it's quite wry that at the end of the film, it seems to be saying that gay, straight, killer, not a killer, it's all our genetics. We're all born this way. I also found it highly amusing that for a film that is really trying to focus on the mystery, really trying to be a murder mystery with clues, suspects, red herrings, that we were getting towards the end and I was saying, there's 5 minutes left. How is this going to wrap up? Everyone's still chasing after each other on a rooftop. 3 minutes left to go. It's like, there's a minute of the film left to go. And as in grand Dario tradition, the motivation, explanation, and all of that is literally wrapped up in the killer's speech in the last minute of the film. It's something you either love or frustrates the hell out of you about Dario Argento movies. I happen to love them. All his foibles I love, and all his evident genius I love. I get why it frustrates the hell out of some people, but it's here right from the start. It's one of the elements that makes up Dario. You either like Dario or you don't like Dario. I really like Dario, and I'm really looking forward to watching the next movie, which again, I haven't yet seen, Four Flies on Grey Velvet.